some very real difficulty.
I call the Honourable Nanaia Mahuta. Tēnā koe.
Kia ora, Mr Chair. I'm happy to speak to the Taxation Annual Rates and Budget Measures Bill in particular, with some focus on Part 1, Annual Rates of Income Tax, and I listened very carefully to members of the government and their contribution, and I came out with three very clear points. Firstly, Member Craig Foss promoted that if you talk about it long enough, maybe people will believe you. He made the point that 13% of people pay 51% of the tax, and if you were to take that tagline alone, that exactly explains why most of the tax cuts are going to the top income earners. But I don't think people are convinced by Mr Foss's argument. In fact, I think they're more perplexed with that type of rationale, because it just justifies the unfairness of the current tax system and how the government is prioritising the investment, which doesn't benefit a lot of people. Then I listened to Mr Paul Quinn, and he operates by the standard that if you talk loud enough, then maybe people will hear you. But we all know that once the decibels started to rise, people actually turned off. And in fact, I couldn't quite figure out what point he was making with regards to Part 1 of the bill. And then when I listened to Member Chris Tremaine, he operates by the edict that if I say it often enough, then maybe even I'll believe it. And one of the points that he was making was just how much middle-income earners are benefiting under this government's tax cuts. But let me present this response in relation particularly to Mr Tremaine's points around the income tax for middle-income earners. He highlighted these groups specifically: nurses, policemen, teachers, wharfies and builders. And he made the point that under Labour they were paying a higher marginal tax rate, and under National that's now gone. But let me say this: those same people are parents, those same people have kids, those same people utilise public services, and those same people are the people that we're listening to that are saying we didn't bet on GST increasing, paying more over the counter for our kai. Petrol has gone up. When we take our kids to the doctor, those after-hour costs are as much for us as they are for anyone else, and we're still paying the mortgage, and some of them are paying higher rents, particularly in areas like Auckland. So those nurses, policemen, teachers, wharfies and builders are making the same noises in terms of concerns around where this government's got its priorities wrong, and even though they are middle-income earners, they have a lower marginal tax rate, because this government has got its priorities in the wrong place, they're having to pay at the other end exorbitant costs because the government has ripped the guts out of the public health sector, where they're saying they're moving the resources to the front line. They're saying they're moving the resources to the front line, but this is what's happening. Backroom functions cannot be absorbed by front-line staff. Now, they might not like it, but they know it's true, because those middle-income families are parents, they have kids, they are paying the same costs as low-income families, and they have the same concerns. Paying more for their kai, paying more for petrol, paying more for after-hours GP services, paying more, getting less, and the value of their wage is worth less under this government than it ever was before. Why? Because they're feeling the pay at the other end. That member for Hamilton West may say rubbish, but we can find people in Hamilton West, in that electorate, middle-income earners, who are making very clear complaints around after-hours health care because they are having to pay more, and they cannot be... And they're paying more, and if they go to the hospital at Waikato Hospital, albeit in a well-developed A&E service, they're having to wait 8 hours. Rather than wait 8 hours, they're having to pay $69 for after-hours health care. But if I go back to the Part 1 of this bill, it concerns me that the government, who are saying it long enough, loud enough, and often enough still aren't convincing middle and low-income earners that their tax cuts are actually benefiting them in the long run, because the concerns that we hear day after day after day are showing that the price and the cost of living is high for those middle and low-income families. Very quiet now. Heads down now. Because they know the cost of living is going to... Mr Chair.
I call the honourable member Nanaya Mahuta.
Because when we're talking about, Mr Speaker, the middle income earners and the tax cuts that have been promoted by this government at the other end, what they're not talking about, and I'll challenge members of the national government to talk about the cost at the other end. They're talking about the tax cuts at the front end, but not the costs accrued by those same families at the other end. Policemen, nurses, teachers, wharfies and builders, their parents, they have kids, they have mortgages. All those costs are adding up, and the price and costs of living for those same families, there we go again. There we go again. The member that operates by the edict, if I say it loud enough, maybe people will hear me, they actually turn off. However, those people, Mr Chair, are parents, they have children, and they are paying at the other end. I see the Minister smiling there because he knows exactly what I'm talking about. You might be able to promote the benefits of tax cuts at the one end, but you cannot justify the increased pressure of costs on these same families at the other end. And that's what we're saying. Inherently, in the tax promotion that this government is making, they are creating an imbalance, an unfairness. They are creating greater inequality between middle and low-income families and what they say, the top 13% who pay 51% of the taxes. They're trying to justify it so that that 13% get the most of the benefits. And people can see through that. So no matter whether you talk long enough, loud enough or often enough, people can see through that. And they do not believe that the proposals at the one end that offer tax cuts are offset by the cost of living pressures at the other end. So that member, I'll say it again and again, because those are the issues that are being presented by members on this side of the House, and we know that the cost of living pressures are not being alleviated by the solutions, certainly that member is promoting in this House. Mr Speaker, I'm happy to speak to Part 1 and reject its proposition that it is actually promoting better opportunities for middle-income families, because there is just no balance. No balance between tax cuts on the one end for middle and low-income families, but the increasing pressure of costs at the other end. There is a greater imbalance, greater unfairness, greater inequality in the treatment of those groups of people, the nurses, the policemen, the teachers, the wharfies and the builders. Happy to speak to Part 1 of this bill.
I call the honourable member Tim McIndoe.